interconnected universes are nothing new. In fact, you might very well be living in one right now, where you're going about your day-to-day life, and meanwhile, somewhere on the other side of the planet, a talking balloon is yapping about movies and comics and stuff. But while they offer an endless number of possibilities for creative storytelling, they do have the caveat of easily becoming overly complicated and bogged down by so many different visions trying to coalesce into one coherent narrative. And one such victim of this is the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which even since the early days has had some difficulty keeping all of its ducks in a row. And while things like Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor did manage to inevitably meet together on screen, the same can be said for the cast of Marvel's TV division. And this resulted in a number of years of it being left up in the air, whether or not the events going on our home screens were even canon. But a few helpful cameos later, and that conundrum seems to have been rectified, with the one that received the loudest cheer in my theater being none other than Matt Murdock showing up to Peter Parker's place of residence as his really good lawyer. And this moment all but guaranteed that minimum Charlie Cox himself would be redonning his iconic horns as the protector of Hell's Kitchen Daredevil. Though over the next 4 years until he received his own sequel series, it was left up in the air if the events that transpired in his series, along with the Netflix Defenders saga, would be folded into the greater Marvel universe. And while eventually the higher-ups did canonize the events of that show and made it part of the relaunched series, I do feel that the transition between Netflix and Disney Plus was not as smooth as I was hoping it would be. And it does feel like that a lot got lost in the jump between these streaming networks. And with the second season of this series now upon us, I want to look back at what I feel the shortcomings were with that first initial attempt and see if they're making the necessary corrections now that we're in season 2. So put on that blindfold that still has me questioning to this day how the actor underneath in real life can see what he's doing, and let's discuss. So Daredevil is one of Marvel's older characters. Created by Stan Lee and Bill Everett in 1964, this horn-headed red acrobat was blessed with enhanced senses at the cost of his eyesight, gifting him the ability to see the world in a whole new light. Or dark, I guess. I don't know. How about you like and subscribe, and then we'll figure out together the best way to describe his condition. Anyways, with this brand new perspective and one dead father later, young Matt Murdock would grow up to serve the city of New York, defending the innocent in both the courtroom, as a defense attorney, and in the rooftops and back alleys as the devil of Hell's Kitchen, Daredevil. And over the half century since his creation, there have been several attempts to bring this character to both the big and small screen, resulting in the epitome of this character's adaptations coming in 2014, where he's played by the actor with the worst eye contact in Hollywood, which for this role is a plus, Charlie Cox, in Netflix's first Marvel original series, Daredevil. By the way, be aware of spoilers coming up for both Daredevil and Daredevil Born Again. And cutting right to the chase, Daredevil on Netflix to me is the single greatest live-action TV series Marvel has ever made. That's right, move over sticky fingers, because there's a new king in town, and he's clad in all red. Sometimes, at least in season 2.
Bang.
The show is hands down the crowning achievement of the entire Netflix deal that Marvel made back in the day, with incredible action, tremendous cinematography, which is ironic considering the main character is vision impaired, interesting and dynamic court scenes, and lovable and memorable characters, along with the single greatest villain the company has ever adapted, Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin. The show really had it all, with his own signature look, the only costume Netflix ever bothered giving one of its heroes, and even got the most satisfying ending, where all the plot lines were resolved, but it still left a little bit more open to continue the story whenever.
And the adventure continues.
It really was all I could have asked for from a superhero show, and it's all told with that down-to-earth, gritty perspective that we don't usually get from this studio. And while it does have a little bit of that insecurity from the source material, it does feel less like it's running away from its more out-there elements, and instead recognize that because it takes place in a larger-than-life cinematic universe, well, then those other creative teams have the more mystical and fantastical elements covered, and there's a wide-open lane left open for telling a down-to-earth, street-level crime drama. Also, I imagine swinging Charlie Cox off the side of a building isn't exactly cheap. The Daredevil series also functioned as an exercise in expressing the different kind of stories that can be told within this superhero mold, allowing for the Marvel Universe to contain a more mature, hard-boiled drama, alongside the more family-friendly adventures like Ant-Man and Captain Marvel. And back then, this was my hope for how all the stories would be told in this growing motion picture adventure, where everyone could have their own unique identity that helped them stand apart. Because though every one of these stories is following some kind of a costume-cladded do-gooder, that doesn't mean they all have to be a carbon copy of each other with just a different power set and costume. Unfortunately though, as time went on, this homogeneity did kind of become the main way that these stories went down, with all their heroes transforming into that quirky one-liner spewing action figure, fighting villains with the same powers as them, but they're evil. Along with a quirky cast of characters usually involving a smart one, a clumsy one, and maybe a love interest. In Moon Knight's case, they were actually all the same person. And following the end of the series and the termination of Netflix's contract with Marvel, we as fans were left in the dark for many years whether or not this whole Defenders saga would even be included in the rest of Marvel's canon. Because after all, it had been produced by a separate division over at the company, outside of Kevin Feige's control, and this was kind of the case of all of Marvel's TV department at the time. So beyond Netflix, things like the shows on Hulu and ABC like Agent Carter and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. would be left ambiguous whether or not they even take place in the same universe. Hell, in the case of the Hellstrom show, he doesn't even get a spot on the website. And though these shows did have their dedicated fan base, it seemed like every time we were gearing up for a big team-up film like with the Avengers, there were always rumors floating about that this was the time that these TV characters were going to cross over with the movie ones. But for one reason or another, something would come up like a scheduling conflict or whatever, maybe they just didn't think it would fit. And it just really felt like that if we ever were going to see these characters again, it would be in an all-new interpretation with an entirely different tone and feel. However, while Marvel did remain tight-lipped on this for several years, in 2021, we did get that confirmation that this division of Marvel would return, with Charlie Cox himself showing up in Spider-Man No Way Home, reuniting with another universe's Foggy Nelson. It's like a casting Ouroboros of this universe. And shortly after this surprise appearance, it would be announced that Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio would be returning to reprise their roles in a relaunching of their Netflix series now taking up residency on Disney Plus, called Daredevil Born Again. Though what seemed like a hard confirmation at the time would still be brought into question whether or not the full extent of Daredevil and the rest of the Netflix saga would be included in Marvel's history. And there's a lot of noise floating around that only some elements would carry over, and maybe a version of their tale happened, but not exactly like what you saw, leaving them open to make any changes that they saw fit. And the real question that was being asked is Born Again a new jumping on point, or would it function as a fourth season to that beloved series? And the answer was kind of something of a mixture of both. It just seemed like this was all just a setup for them to co-opt all the parts of the Daredevil story that they thought were marketable and do away with any of the elements that they thought were superfluous.
She-Hulk smash.
And that's kind of what happened with the Born Again series. Originally being made to be kind of its own entirely unique entity, bringing only over a handful of members of the original cast, namely Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio to reprise their roles, but pretty much doing an entirely new take on this universe without bringing over fan favorites like Foggy, Karen, or even the Kingpin's beloved Vanessa. It also was seemingly going for less of a hard-hitting story and more of an episodic approach, originally planned to have 18 episodes in its first season, making it the longest run of Disney Plus programming on this scale that we've ever seen. It also would have just been the longest season of Daredevil, period, considering the fact that the 3 prior seasons were only 13 episodes apiece. And in addition to an entirely new cast, it also looked like it would be donning a bit more of a family-friendly approach, with less intense action and drama, and more of a fantasy comic book feel. This could be seen in the fact that both Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk would appear in other people's series like Hawkeye, Echo, and She-Hulk, where they were a bit more acrobatic and superhuman, and just generally less grounded than they were normally interpreted as. But basically the writing was on the wall that this was going to be something entirely of its own, and not necessarily geared to those original fans of that initial grounded crime drama. But apparently while filming the damn thing, Kevin Feige got a chance to look at some early episodes they were putting together, and was not pleased with the results.
Cheesesteaks are great in Philly.
What the hell am I looking at?
So much so that he ordered the entire show to be rebuilt from the ground up and pushed the release date back by over a year. Swapping out the showrunners and instead replacing them with the guys who worked on the Punisher series on Netflix, resulting in them having to basically reshoot the entire pilot and finale, reworking the show from being that 18-episode anthology into something more in line with what had come before, with an episodic adventure that would span over the course of 9 installments. It also looked like they amped up the show's rating, because initial reports said this thing wasn't exactly going to be TVMA like the original series, but with the reshoots, they completely altered that, and now people are dropping F-bombs and exploding in bags of blood, almost in an effort to mimic that whole hard-hitting approach, without showing the same level of restraint that Netflix's creators had. Because though the Netflix series was TVMA, there was this level of restraint that kept the brutality extremely grounded, and they also only ever dropped like 1 F-bomb.
I take pride in that.
Let me ask you this.
What's that?
What about Hope?
Oh, come on, Frank. My sanity.
The show was gruesome and had some disturbing elements, don't get me wrong, but it always just felt so natural and matter of fact that we would hardly ever linger on it. And that's not to say that it felt like the show was holding back, but more so it knew where to pull its punches, so that way when things really hit the fan, there felt like a true paradigm shift. But I guess the creators over at Marvel were just excited that now they could express their more sadistic tendencies with Disney finally authorizing R-rated material on their streaming platform. Oh yeah, for the longest time, that was a non-starter on this streaming service. My, how the times have changed. Anyways, these reshoots would amount to about 3 episodes worth of material being included, namely doing things like bringing back the old cast like Foggy, Karen, and even Bullseye, and finding ways to include them within the story. Though I don't exactly enjoy how they did so, they were there. Briefly. And while they originally planned for the show to air in 2024, the first season would actually premiere in March of 2025 and be, well, to be kind, it was actually one of the better Disney Plus shows. Like, if we're just talking about the show in terms of what's on this streaming platform and their original material, I do think it was one of the stronger Marvel shows, with above average compelling characters, a fun exploration of this corner of the Marvel universe, and a few good fight scenes here and there, even if they were pretty few and far between. But while I will say in terms of a show it's fine, nothing really noteworthy, the show was as competently as constructed as one can hope for given the circumstances, though it's anything but perfect. With pretty lackluster depictions of its new characters, none of whom have anywhere near the same level of intrigue as the original cast, all of a bit more generic cinematography, a boring color palette, flatter visuals, and a less exciting depiction of the city of New York. The script is serviceable but never really locks you in, outside of the few scenes with say like The Punisher, which in my opinion are the best parts of the show.
You know you're a wall-to-wall asshole.
I mean, it makes sense. They brought the guys in who did the Punisher show back in the day, rather than, I guess, the ones who worked on Daredevil. I'm not quite sure why they did that, but despite my criticisms, I do have a lot of sympathy for Born Again, because admittedly, Netflix's Daredevil series is a pretty tough act to follow. They really told a complete and definitive story with this cast and crew, and trying to follow it up in any way was always going to be a lofty endeavor. And while I don't exactly appreciate the new style and aesthetics this show has, I do respect their boldness to go in their own direction rather than trying to mimic what they did before, and take some pretty ballsy swings, even if I don't entirely agree with them, like for example killing off Foggy in the first episode, leaving Matt out of the suit until like the middle of the series, and trying to distract from the compelling characters with things like Muse and whatever he was getting up to. I can't tell if they genuinely thought it was surprising that under the mask he was that creepy guy from Heather's Book Talk. You know, the one we all clocked the second he shuffled on the screen. There's also that one really out of place episode with Daredevil in the bank, which would have been a fine enough one-shot, but was clearly a carryover from what the show originally was meant to be, which was that adventure of the week sort of deal. I also absolutely hated the ending, cutting it off on a cliffhanger where now we're just hanging out in Josie's bar, gearing up for the next season. I understand that after the reshoots, they were kind of forced to divide this show into 2 parts, but I've always just disagreed with when shows do this. Yeah, I feel like the best approach is to make each individual season its own self-contained installment, and if there are any loose-hanging threads, they're merely subplots and not like the main conflict. That always just felt kind of lame and makes me question why are we stopping the story now when there's clearly more you wanted to tell. It honestly just seems like they just kind of ran out of money, which I mean considering that this thing cost what, $200 million to produce. Then yeah, I guess it makes sense that their wallets were getting kind of light. But these are all just symptoms of that main problem which Marvel often suffers from, which is that lack of vision, which is I guess something that Daredevil and Scarlet Witch both have in common, am I right?
Oh, brother, this guy's the best guy around.
But it is really that lack of a unifying goal that they set for themselves, resulting in all these different changes being made and easily inflating the budgets. Those original Netflix Daredevil seasons only ever cost around like $50 million, a fraction of what Born Again was taken in. And the result was not a better product in the end, which makes me just think that if they had had a cohesive plan put together in the first place, they wouldn't have had to go and push this thing back a year and cut it into 2 different pieces in order for it to feel like a complete story. And whether or not it actually even does feel like a complete story is still left up in the air, considering the fact that we're only now starting that second half. But I do have hope for this season too, because now that they have had a year to iron things out and move through those initial growing pains, it does seem like they have more of an opportunity to really revel in the material that they're working with and create something that's both its own unique entity, but also pay some homage to the original series that this is all derived from. I also think that Marvel in general is just getting a bit better at putting together their TV shows, with things like Loki Season 2 and Wonder Man being particular highlights. I do think they're starting to find some kind of a groove and can approach these stories with a bit more confidence. And while it does look like it's going to have to make some room for a bunch of cameos like Jessica Jones and a greater degree of Bullseye, I have a bit more confidence that they can weave them into the narrative a bit more cleanly, having had more time to prepare bringing them in. Also, we're finally past that Surf Dracula phase of this show, and spent the entire first season building up to what we all came to see, so thankfully that's now behind us, meaning that we can really get to the good stuff. And while it still does seem to have that classic Marvel gray filter and smoky haze to obscure any visual effects, It does seem like they're still going to continue to implement their own style and try their hardest to push the boundaries of the confines that Marvel Studios usually locks its shows into. But I guess we'll see in the coming weeks how it all shapes up. But to wrap things up, Daredevil and Marvel television as a whole has had a pretty rocky journey making its way into mainline continuity, with a number of different starts and stops over the years that has resulted in a first season of the show that just kind of feels half-baked and incomplete. By no means a bad series, but doesn't wholly handle what came before or even stand up to Marvel's latest offerings. But I am curious to see if this team managed to learn from their prior mistakes and are able to course correct come this latest season. And it looks like we're going to be getting a bunch more of the Netflix characters showing back up in the main Marvel Universe's New York. But though Kristen Ritter and Mike Coulter are confirmed to be returning, there's one question I still have. Is Finn Jones going to be redonning the glowing golden fist? I know many people hated his show, I was one of them, but if the Mandarin from Iron Man 3 can become the heart and soul of the Wonder Man show, then no one is beyond redemption. Hey, thanks for watching. If you stuck all the way to the end, why not check out another one of our videos on screen now? And if you'd like to chat with us directly, come join our Discord, link in the description below.